Hey guys, I just wanted to come on here and as you could tell by this title of this vlog, I wanted to let you know what's been going on and why I haven't been posting. So, where do I start? Is it May or July? It was July. So, July of this year, my son Brady, who is my older of the twins, my husband and I noticed that he had this area on his throat that looked like an Adam's apple. So I didn't really at first think anything of it. It didn't seem to bother him. It was just kind of like there, and we noticed it, but it didn't bother him. So we were like, we'll just kind of let it be, and if anything happens, we'll take him to the doctor. So I would say that I first noticed it in May. That's why I had May in my head. I'm like, why did I even say May? So for probably about 2 months, he had this area on his neck that looked like an Adam's apple. And obviously, a baby having an Adam's apple is not normal because a man doesn't get an Adam's apple until after he has gone through puberty. So I just thought it was weird. I just kept my eye on it because he didn't have it at birth either. Like, it was something that developed. So in the pit of my stomach, I knew that this wasn't normal. So one day I was looking at it and I noticed that it was a little bit red, and I thought it was because he was kind of getting to that stage where he was trying to climb out of his crib, and he would kind of smash his neck into his crib rail and kind of move around. So I didn't really think anything of it. I was just kind of like, okay, he caused trauma and irritation to it while he was just being a crazy 1-year-old. But then I noticed that it was getting bigger and more prominent and more red. And I remember it was a Thursday and I got home from work. Now, mind you, thankfully I don't work Fridays, so it was technically my Friday. So I got home and my mom was watching 3 of my kids. I got home with typically I always pick up one child from daycare. So I picked up, I believe it was Liam, my oldest, and brought him home. And when I got home, I instantly freaked out because I saw Brady's neck and it was big and red, and I was like, oh my god, his airway. The nurse in me was like, his airway is going to become occluded at night and something's gonna happen. He's gonna stop breathing. So I ended up taking him to urgent care. The doctor at urgent care took one look at it and said, I'm not messing with this. I want you to take him to the emergency room, and they're likely going to do some imaging and figure out exactly what this is. So, of course, I had done some Googling, and I kind of went into the urgent care visit assuming that it was what was called a thyroglossal duct cyst, because I looked up Adam's apple in a baby, and that's one of the first things that comes up is that. So, basically, I took him to the emergency room. They did an ultrasound, which was like pulling teeth because he screamed and cried the entire time, which made blood rush into the area. They were trying to tell if it was a vascular cyst or a non-vascular cyst. They deemed it a thyroglossal duct cyst based on the ultrasound, and they said that it was infected, and that's why it was red and it was getting swollen and all that. So that was good enough for me. I was like, okay. So they ended up giving him Keflex, which is an antibiotic, an oral antibiotic that I had to give him 3 times a day for 10 days. So I was like, okay, that's fine. So it just so happened that this kind of matched up 1 week. So he took it for the 10 days. And then I think after 14 days, he conveniently had his 18-month checkup at the doctor's. So when I took him to the doctor, it started to become red and infected again. Now, that was literally 4 days after finishing a course of antibiotics, which is not a good sign. So the doctor took a look at it and was like, what was he put on in the emergency room? And I was like, Keflex 3 times a day for 10 days. So they just put him right back on that. That was a Friday. By the following Thursday, his neck was no better. This time it did not respond to the antibiotic whatsoever, which made me very nervous. So we called the on-call doctor on Thursday and from his pediatrician's office, and we said, look, this is what's going on. He's on antibiotics. He's been on antibiotics for almost a week now, 6 days at the time, and it's not getting any better. So the doctor obviously also wasn't happy with that. And he was like, you need to take him to Tufts in Boston. That's the, I guess, pediatric specialist that my doctor refers to. So we ended up taking him to Tufts Floating Children's Hospital in Boston, the emergency room. So when we got there, they were great. They instantly started an IV because they assumed he was going to need IV antibiotics, which is, well, that's what I assumed was going to happen. They ended up they basically popped the infection and they aspirated a little bit and took a sample of what it was just to figure it out, because I guess there was a question if it was what's called a dermoid cyst, which is kind of like an infection. So sorry, my camera conveniently died. But anyways, so what I was saying, we went to the emergency room and they took a biopsy of the cyst, and I didn't explain, watching back to see where I was, I never actually told you guys. So a thyroglossal duct cyst happens when a child is in utero, and what it is, when the thyroid is developing, it's, how do I describe it? It's like tissue left over that should have been like reabsorbed by the body, but it happened during the formation of the thyroid itself. So it just leaves tissue there. So that causes the cyst because it's just basically an accumulation of tissue that's like right up inside. It's under the hyoid bone, but every thyroglossal duct cyst can be a little bit different in its structure. That's the word I was looking for. And some can be more complex than others. Unfortunately, my son's ended up being quite the beast. So he had a biopsy done, and they started him on oral antibiotics. Oh, not oral, IV antibiotics, and they admitted us because the doctor felt that it was likely going to need surgery. The first time around, what happened? He was just on he was on the IV antibiotics, and it did start to look better. So they ended up discharging us, I think it was a Thursday night. We ended up being discharged home on Saturday. No, it was Sunday. We got discharged home on a Sunday. So the thyroglossal duct cyst, I'm like getting all the times that we've been in the hospital mixed up. So the first time we were there, got IV antibiotics, ended up being discharged on oral antibiotics. Probably a week later, so we were discharged on a Sunday. By that following Saturday, didn't look better. The cyst looked worse. Oh, and I forgot to mention, the first time we were in the hospital, they also drained it. They actually went in and made an incision and then put an elastic band drain, which is literally just looks like a teeny tiny like tube of elastic that they just put in, and it just allows the drainage to come out. Now, what the plan was to get rid of the infection so that when they had to remove the cyst regardless, but they wanted it to be less infected or not infected at all, so that when they took it out, there would be less of a scar, and it would be less that they had to take out, because if something's big and like angry and irritated, it's gonna be more traumatic to take out. So that was the goal, was to get all the infection gone, and then they were gonna remove it. So unfortunately, we never even made it to that point because we were discharged, and on Sunday, the following Saturday, we were right back in the emergency room with the same issue, and it was just worsening. So they made the decision to do surgery when we got there. They had to do a CAT scan just to fully visualize what they were dealing with. Based on the CAT scan, I guess that the doctors were sort of not agreeing on what the plan should be, but what ended up happening was surgery. And they surgically removed the cyst. They said it was quite complex. They actually, I forget the name of the procedure. I'll have to put it somewhere down here, but it's an actual procedure where they take out a piece of your hyoid bone. I will link what the surgery is called below. I probably should have had the name of that before, but I cannot think of it off the top of my head right now. But they do remove a piece of the hyoid bone, and the doctor said that it was actually a much more complex cyst because it followed a tract like into his thyroid. They had to take out a whole bunch of tissue, the cyst itself. They ended up biopsying it, and thankfully it was non-malignant, no signs of cancer, but it was just like a typical thyroglossal duct cyst with white blood cells in it. So that was good. So The plan was to do a 1 month follow-up. Everything was fine. We've been applying Mederma. So when they do the surgery, they actually stitch from the inside, and they use dissolvable stitches and then put some skin glue on his neck. And we don't have to do anything. So it's on for a week, and then you start to apply bacitracin to the area after 7 days, just so that the skin glue can come off easy. Thankfully, in our case, skin glue just kind of came off by itself, so that was awesome. We didn't have to really do anything or tug at his skin. He did amazing, by the way. The entire time that he was there, he stole the hearts of every single nurse, doctor. They loved him. Like, you cannot not love Brady. He is just the light of our lives. He's the center of attention everywhere he goes. His disposition is just amazing. He was so cooperative for his vital signs. He was so good when they poked and prodded him. Now, mind you, when this whole thing happened, I don't know if you guys are familiar, the Tufts nurses went on strike. So that also happened literally the week that he had all of this happening. So that definitely affected his care. The nurses that were there were the pace was a lot slower, I noticed. A majority of the nurses were from the South. So I'm assuming that it was like travel nurses that were put on assignments here. But parking was atrocious. They were picketing outside. They were literally just walking circles around the entrance. And of course, our room, it was way up. I think it's on the 7th floor, but you could hear them all night. I'm all for what they were striking for, but it was just a bad time for us to be patients. I was like, oh boy. I'm not saying the nursing care that we got wasn't good. It was just very slow, and nobody knew where anything was, and discharge process was slower, so everything was affected. But back to everything. So we thought everything was over. They did surgery. He recovered fine. He never touched it. He was amazing. He did amazing. We had a 1 month follow-up in August, and everything looked great. And then we had a 3 month follow-up scheduled for November. Now, rewind probably about 2 weeks ago from now, and we started to notice that his neck, we were told that this should not reoccur. Like, there was a less than 10% chance that something like this should happen. He laughed and he tilted his head back, and I could instantly see that cyst-like structure again, and I was like, no. So I looked, we watched it. My husband called his PD. His PD said to call Tufts, the ENT on call, so my husband did that. They said, okay, look at it, monitor it tonight, and then if anything happens or it gets bigger, call us tomorrow. So of course, he wakes up the next morning, it's bigger. Doesn't look infected. It didn't look red. It never looked inflamed. So that was a good thing, but it was getting bigger again. So we call ENT, and they were supposed to get us in like right away. And of course, they didn't have availability for a full week. So we got in this past Friday. Today is Sunday. And they took one look at him at the clinic. His appointment was at 11. He ended up having an ultrasound at 1 o'clock. And then he ended up having another surgery on his neck at 9 o'clock that night. So the whole thing was a whirlwind. The poor kid has a scar that literally goes the whole entire length of his neck. I will insert some pictures here just so you can kind of see the progression of what has happened to our poor little guy.